Hello, I'm sitting here with Lee Sklar, one of the most consummate bass players of all time, and actually one of the most consummate sidemen, and this is what I want to talk to you about, Lee.
Okay.
First, welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm proud to be here.
The thing is, your job entails playing with a million different people, playing a million different styles. Is that something that you have to do, or is that part of the job that you enjoy?
I think by the nature of just being a sideman, you do become a chameleon if you want to be a working sideman. So I tend to embrace the diversity of styles I have to play. It keeps you kind of on the precipice all the time. You're kind of hanging by your nails every day, not knowing what you're showing up to. Because a lot of times I don't have a clue what I'm walking into when I get hired for jobs. It could be a polka date, it could be a movie, a commercial, a reggae date, funk, anything. So you're always on edge, and I kind of like that living on the precipice.
Because also one of the things is surely going to be, because dealing with these different genres, there's lots of very, very different types of people who do that. And is that much of a challenge, do you find? I mean, are you obviously very good at around people? I mean, you find that...
Yeah, I mean, it's very funny, actually, because when I'm not in the studio, I'm really a loner. I'm really content to be home gardening, and I don't see people socially. So the studio is kind of my social life. And I've cultivated relationships with a lot of musicians that I see that really the studio is where we visit and hang out, and then we all go our separate ways. So I kind of like that. That satisfies my social skills. I've saved every date book I've had since 1970, and through the 80s, I've got so many dates in there that all they said was Jeff, and it was for Jeff Porcaro. And when I knew Jeff was going to be on the date, I didn't care about anything else because we were really close friends. So they would just say Jeff, and I would just show up and I'd see Jeff, and I didn't care what we were doing. I was happy. Yeah, I miss him profoundly. Yeah,
I had the honor of working with him myself. But the other thing is, but you tour a lot. Not, so much now.
I tour as much as I get called for.
Right.
I still love touring. I think if I was actually given a choice where they said you had to pick the studio or touring, I would still pick touring over the studio because I like the immediacy of an audience. I like playing in front of people. I like hitting a note and knowing that's the end of my relationship with that. Nobody's going to sit and scrutinize that and question it and play with it and Pro Tool it and all. Boom, you hit it, done. It's over. So I still...
You clearly haven't heard of YouTube.
Yeah, I actually am kind of a YouTube whore. I love going there and just watching things that we've done, and I'm proud of a lot of the stuff I've seen there. It's really cool.
It is great that you can go and find everything you ever did.
Yeah, it's actually freaky that the stuff's been documented, because there's a lot of stuff I've seen that, where was the camera? I mean, stuff from years ago, and you wonder, how the hell did this even end up being filmed? I mean, I was unaware of it, so...
And what do you think is the difference? Because, there are certain, for instance, like you get a difference in studio and touring musicians, often in that, I mean, the unkindest way of looking at it is, for instance, in the studio, it's worth paying for the expensive guy who's going to get the stuff done and come up with the great ideas which are going to make your record. Then when you go on the road, if you don't want to spend the money, you just have to find someone who can play the stuff that the other guy made.
Cut it.
Yeah. And do you find there's very much... It's a very different hat, isn't it, being on the road to being in the studio? I mean, I would say that like your skills as a diplomat and just your ability to get on with people kind of count for almost as much as your ability as a musician.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you're definitely... You're walking a lot of lines when you're in the studio with them. I mean, a great example of this was there's an artist that will remain unmentioned name-wise, but I've done a lot of records with him, and we were booked to do his last album, and he called and he said, look, the road band would like to do this one. And I said, well, it's your prerogative. They're your band. I mean, and I know they're all good musicians. So he canceled me, and John Robinson was going to be the drummer on it, so he canceled us. And about 4 days later, he called and said, are you still available? And I said, yeah, actually I am. So he said, now, do you mind, the band would like to hang out at the session? And so we went in there, and I knew the guys, so we were all saying hi, and just hanging out. And we cut the first tune, and when we came back and listened to the playback, they all said, "How'd you come up with that idea?" And I said, "That's why I'm a studio musician."
Right.
Because I said, the problem for you guys is you're all great players, but we come in, we have like maybe 3 days to cut the album. We have to come up with ideas on the spot like that. I said, you guys spend a couple of weeks rehearsing, you spend 3 months on the road gigging this stuff, improving on it probably because you've had time to live with it and let the stuff, but by the end of it, you sort of think you thought of it because you've been playing it every night. But I said, you're really playing our ideas. And I said, that's what happens in the studio, and that's why you're the touring band. Now, not to say you couldn't cultivate that skill, but you don't do it often. So when somebody says, here's a sheet of paper with a couple of chords on it, make a song out of it. They've never had to do that before. So that's really the skill that comes as a studio player, between being able to respond to the song, and when that little red light turns on, you don't choke. It doesn't intimidate you. You kind of, that's the light you go to. And I love that. I love the uncertainty of every day and the anxiety I go through. And I kind of have a mantra when I'm driving to work of, please don't suck. Please don't suck. Because you don't know what you're getting into.
You or them?
No, me. I'm always concerned that I'm going to do a good job, because especially if I don't know what I'm going to be doing, you don't want to be thrown into something that maybe is out of your comfort zone. Because at the end of the day, it's an expensive process to make a record, and it's like if you were a painter and you were just painting and you kind of went, today doesn't feel good. You come back tomorrow. You've got to leave with a masterpiece every day. There's too much money being spent, too much time constraints. So you got to be great at it.
That brings me perfectly to my next point, which is the difference between being a session player and, like, say, when you have a band, and those guys, when they go and sort of, they rehearse whatever, they set up somewhere and they spend months and months working on their parts. And I find most of my best work is when I've been in a kind of a band situation. You had a song that you were coming back to every day for weeks and weeks and weeks. And the whole point is the reason you get hired as a studio guy is because you're known as someone who can come in, come up with ideas, get out.
Yeah.
Right. That's the whole thing. But do you find often, because of those time constraints, where you'll come and you do something and you think it's great, you're perfectly happy with it, but then say you'll hear it on the radio and you go, oh, I could have gone.
Well, the problem for that really is, it's like when I did Another Day in Paradise with Phil Collins. When I showed up, all he had was a drum machine and a couple of sketched ideas, and we never cut anything as a group. So I was the first guy going on. So I'm sitting here having to come up with a bass part to something that's really a cloud at that point that he was going to be building on. And there's been many times where I've heard things where I'm at the very front end of the project, and then suddenly there's strings, there's background singers. I hear they've changed the vocal lines, the lyric. And I go, if I'd have known that stuff was going to be there, I wouldn't have played what I played on it, because I may have overplayed or I may not have led in the same way I would like to, but I wasn't privy to where it was going at that point. So I had to just go with what I thought. And if I could have gone back and maybe changed something, I might have done it. But for the most part, I figure whatever that is, it is. I've moved on at that point. If they called me and said, we need to recut your part, I would be happy to do it. Hearing it, like when I hear the stories about McCartney being the last thing on the Beatles records, where you wonder, how did this guy come up with Fixing a Hole and all these unbelievable parts? But if suddenly you go, the whole thing's there, and then you get to paint this beautiful painting on top of it, and then you go, oh, that explains a lot to me.
Right.
So.
You were lucky enough. Your career basically spans what I would call like the glory days of the studio, which I think we can all safely accept are behind us now.
Yeah.
But and what were the actual glory days, would you say, and how much has it changed?
Well, I think that from my perspective, probably the glory days started in the beginning of the '60s. And I came in around 69, 70 is when I started. So there was that huge period of the Wrecking Crew, with all those great musicians doing all the records. They were unfortunate enough to be in a time when credits weren't put on albums, so nobody knew who they were. They don't realize that everything from the Mamas and the Papas and the Beach Boys and Frank Sinatra and all these things were the same bunch of guys doing all that stuff. Yeah. So I was lucky enough that when my career started, they were giving credits on records. So suddenly people were seeing it. So the real heyday.
Singer-songwriter was the birth of the credited
Yeah, it really. Well,
wasn't
my
it?
whole career started with James Taylor,
Right, of course.
where I had never really even listened to that kind of music. I was in a band called Wolfgang in the late '60s, and the only thing, my influences were Cream and Hendrix and Zeppelin, and that was the kind of music I listened to. I was totally into that. And then suddenly James showed up, but he showed up at a rehearsal of that band because he was a friend of a friend, and he was hanging out. And then his Apple album came out, and he got a job at the Troubadour. He was offered a gig at the Troubadour Club in Los Angeles, and he said, they called me, Peter Asher called me, because through a couple of different avenues, he got my name through James and Danny Korchmar. And they said, would you like to come and play at the Troubadour with us? So I said, great, I'd love to. And we went in there, and next thing you know, James is on the cover of Time magazine. He's brought in this entire new movement of the singer-songwriter, sensitive and all that. And they said, do you want to go on tour for a month? I said, sure. I was in college. I was going to become an oceanographer or a medical illustrator. So it was very bizarre. So I said, yeah, I'd love to. Let's. And then it just snowballed. And then with our names on the album, suddenly people like Jackson Browne came along. So Russ Kunkel and I were called to work with him. And there was that whole West Coast thing with the Eagles and Poco and Burrito Brothers and Linda Ronstadt and Bonnie Raitt. So this whole movement started there. And we were blessed to have been in the right place at the right time with the right skills. For that. So through the entire 70s, it was like I got to the point where I developed viral meningitis from overwork because I was getting no sleep, no food. We were doing like on an average of 4 sessions a day, 6 days a week. It was like this factory work, but exhilarating factory work. And then we would temper that with touring. So it was an amazing time, and the 80s was still good. But I really kind of find my fault with everything was the advent of digital technology, because suddenly the whole process changed. You started seeing drum machines instead of drummers, guys doing synth bass instead of bass. Even though I kept working, I saw a lot of people falling by the wayside. And then it parlayed itself into going from vinyl to cassettes, which you could only maybe duplicate once, and it was a useless thing. So people were still buying product, to CDs, which somebody could buy one and copy 10,000 units of it. So everybody stopped buying product, and suddenly the business changed. And there's a lot I miss of the old days, but I also want to continue working. So I try not to be an old fart and just sit there like Grandpa talking about the old days.
That's the thing, you got
to you got to temper that, because it's like talking with a lot of young musicians I work with now, and you don't want to get into arguing about analog versus digital because they've never heard analog, so they have no reference point.
The warmth of analog versus the clenth of digital,
yes, exactly.
Which surely must be.
I just, given my druthers, I'd be sitting there, 16 IPS, non-Dolby, just, give me some noise and just give me some fat in the thing.
Absolutely.
So it's a different time now, but the heyday definitely for me was the 70s, 80s, even though I'm still working quite a bit.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
more than most. It must be.
Yeah, I'm almost embarrassed at times when I talk to guys in LA and they say, "What have you been doing?" A lot of times I downplay it because I know they're not working, and I know they're damn near as good as me, if not better. But they're just not getting the calls because they haven't learned the proper methods for cuddling and being affectionate with a producer, and just being gentle with them.
Lee, thank you very much. That was
it's
perfect.
an absolute pleasure, and I have to say I'm such a deep fan of you.
Oh.
Your playing is so exquisite, and I love your work, and your energy is deep and profound, and maybe we should go cuddle for a little while.
I think so. Come on, let's go.